The idea was that you left London and you just headed east and eventually you got to Kathmandu. There's no shortage of entertainment. God, it was entertaining all the way. Many, many years ago, I started Lonely Planet, the guidebook publisher. Back in the 1970s, in the era of the Hippie Trail, my wife Maureen and I traveled across Asia and ended up in Australia. You know, the Beatles had been up in the Himalaya searching for sitar music and enlightenment, and we were riding the Marrakesh Express. It was the era of the magic bus. The idea was that these buses pick people up in Amsterdam and in the next 90 days drive you to Kathmandu. We didn't do that, we drove ourselves. The vehicle to drive in was a VW Combi van. You know, that was the vehicle for the Hippie Trail. It had flowers painted on it, it would have been even better. But we couldn't afford a Combi. We took an old minivan, which we bought for 65 quid or something. Cars were cheaper in those days. We had tents and sleeping bags and little camping things to cook with. We started in London, we took a ferry over to Netherlands. We went down through France, we went across Switzerland, down into Italy. We took a ferry across to Dubrovnik, Greece into Turkey to Istanbul, took a ferry to leave Europe and arrive in Asia. There were no bridges across the Bosphorus. We went across to Ankara and then up to the Black Sea, and then pretty much everybody left into Iran, and then crossed into Afghanistan to Herat. And of course, Afghanistan was fine in those days. There was one particular restaurant called Siggy's, run by a German who clearly his name was Siegfried, and that was just the place to go to. There were these stories that whatever was hot and top of the pops that week in London, the tapes would be flown out to him. So the latest Santana or Pink Floyd or whatever was playing in Siggy's that night. We sold the minivan in Kabul. Then we took a bus over the Khyber Pass, down into Pakistan. Eventually ended up going through Delhi into Varanasi and the Holy Ganges, and then up to Kathmandu. And I still remember it as being sort of magical. There was this town below you, which you'd been heading towards for the last 6 months. Music was playing in the little oil lamps, and it was just magical. Some people like us carried on through Southeast Asia. You couldn't cross Burma by land. You had to fly. So we flew to Bangkok, which was really like, that was the biggest sort of culture shock of the whole trip. Everything worked in Bangkok. We hadn't seen air conditioning in ages. And then we hitchhiked all the way to Singapore, down through Thailand and Malaysia, down through Indonesia. Got to Bali, and we were sort of thinking, well, how the hell do we get to Australia from here? And we bumped into this New Zealander with a yacht and hitched a ride on his yacht. The guy with the yacht said, we'll sail down to Australia. We should make it in 6 days. Might take 8 at the outside. Well, it took 16. God, you're crazy when you're this age. You feel you're invincible. The boat didn't sink, so we did get to Australia eventually, even though we'd run out of food by that time. And then we spent a year in Sydney, and while we were living in Sydney that year, we invented Lonely Planet. We kept meeting people who said, oh, travelled overland, we'd like to do that. We've thought about that. How did you do it? And after a while, we thought, well, we've written this stuff down so many times. Why don't we actually make a book out of it? That's how it happened. There were a lot of interesting characters on the road. I think that, we met a lot of people, and we sort of, passed back and forth, and we had a really good time. On one hand, everything is so easy these days. Information's much more readily available, and things are, they are a lot easier. But if people want to go somewhere and, be adventurous and get off the beaten track, they can still do it.